A lot of people say, everyone's got their own way of doing things and it's really up to you to find what works best for you. Those people are wrong. Well, caveat, 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 but there are certain things that are really inescapable if you want to be effective in your design efforts. The thing we're going to talk about today is how overrides work in Figma and what that means for your designs. Digital design and development have grown up together over the years. If you've been a designer long enough to remember what it was like designing in Photoshop, you know how painful it was not having a smart text override. Developers went from handwriting what was essentially the final program in very low-level machine code to a modern way of doing things where you're essentially writing a program that writes a program that speaks to a bunch of third parties, which writes the final program for them. And that's kind of what we need to do, i.e., instead of directly changing the final artwork, what we want to do is edit components and styles that affect the layout rather than directly editing the page. For instance, when you're writing CSS, you have this concept of going from very broad statements like all these things need to have a corner radius to this particular thing needs to have this particular gradient in the active state. So you go from very broad to very specific. And so we need to do the same, have broad statements like all reds need to be this exact shade of red, to more specific statements like this one piece of copy needs to sit in this text field. Okay, so here is our example. We have a main component here, which is a sort of product card. You can tell it's a main component because of the icon on the top left here, this item called item, right? We have a bunch of children for this item, or instances of this component, that sit in groups of 2. So we've got a group of 2 here, group of 2 here, group of 2 here, all the way down the page. The reason we've done it in a group of 2 is that we are using this frame as an auto layout, and it is a vertical auto layout. So if I were to ungroup these, they would all just sit one underneath each other. So the best way to do this, at least in this version of Figma, is put them in groups and then you can put them one next to each other. This needs to be in a group. You select that item, you move it up. Bob's your uncle. Right. Now, main event. All right, so let's create some exceptions. Let's write some very specific instructions into these children and see what happens. So let's say this first one, we're going to make this instead of silver, we're going to make it purple. The second one, instead of just price here, we're going to say USD 9,000. And actually, you know what? That should be right hand. That should be on the... Actually, let's make it centered. We'll do that, right? And I think I want a different font here. So let us say it's going to be... What's rock salt? Oh, okay, no, not that. Not that. Where's old Montserrat? There you go. That looks reasonable. Same exact style as the one above, so maybe let's go regular. Okay, so we've got one which is a color override, another which is a text style override, and text alignment override. On this one over here, we're going to take this object, and now I have 2 sister objects. In other words, 2 objects that are the same size and have the same sort of like parent relationship, i.e. they have no parent. If you look at these component 1 and component 2, there's no other components within this. It's literally just a bunch of objects within these 2. So if I go to this third item here and I say, instead of component 1, I would like you to have component 2, which is the question mark. What is that going to do? Right. Then for the third one, I think what we're going to do is let's get an image. All right. So let's replace this image. Choose an image. Lovely. Okay. So what is that going to do? Interesting question. Then let's do, let's use the group in this case, and let us do selection colors. And let's say that instead of this white color here, we're going to change this to green. And now, just to make this work, what we're going to do is we're going to change this circle over here to be white and 100%. And we're going to change this to be yellow. I know it's not legible. I'm just trying to show you how the overrides work, okay? So what you can see here is you've got this object already picking up that main component color. You've got everything kind of listening to their very specific instructions that I've given them. And now what we're going to do, let me get all this out the way. We're going to change the core component, the main component over here. We're going to change some of these properties and see how it affects. So one last thing, let's do a corner radius on this. Let's say that this has no corner radius. And then let's say that this one has a corner radius of 40. And I know that this looks ugly, I know, but we're just looking at the components, okay? This is not how I would really design something. All right, let us say that we're going to do that. Now, let's start with this silver color. Instead of the silver, let's say that we want this to be a new color. I think we need a new color. Let's make a new color. Let's make something that's a little bit more healthy looking. Okay, so let's make this color into a color style. Let's call this light teal, I guess. Did I even spell teal right? I don't know, doesn't matter. We're going to change that silver into light teal. And everything has picked up that light teal color. So that's great, right? Very, very cool. However, we've already changed this one to purple. And so this purple object, this first object here, is listening to the specific instructions that it has received rather than listening to the general instruction of this object needs to be teal. The background color needs to be teal. And so it's kind of ignoring that and saying, well, no, I was given specific instructions to be purple and that's what I'm going to be. Similarly, if we had a component 3, and you can tell that this is the worst way to name your components, but again, just an explanation, not a design. Let us say that we've got another thing here, and this is just Mitch, why can't you make useful things? Hey, why can't you make useful things? Well, yeah, I make useful things all day. No one wants. Blah, blah, blah. Cool. So now we've got this other component 3, with this like Lumo green that's barely visible on this white. And by the way, there's an amazing color contrast tool that tells you how bad your color contrast is. And as you can see, mine is absolute crap. So I'm not going to change it though, because it's just an explanation. So let's change this component 1 to be component 3. All right. Couple of problems we see because this text is actual text. It's maintaining the size that it was given, which is this size. But because the object itself, these objects here, are much smaller than the container on the main component, it's retaining the size of the text, but it's reducing the size of the main component. So if I expand this out, it should look right. And so the way to get around that is to outline stroke. And now bear in mind, this text is never going to be editable ever again. You're going to have to make a new text object if you want to edit that text. So it's not recommended in most situations. All right, so now you can see those have all changed, and that's fine, except for ones where you have a specific instruction. Right, so let's do that again, but instead of using component 3, this component, what we're going to do is we're going to create a specific instruction for this thing to listen to component 1. Now it's already on component 1. So what's going to happen now? All right, so we've said to this one, we've given this one a specific instruction to say you must be component 1. If we were to change this to component 3, it still changes. However, if we try the same thing with color, if we say to this, you are now going to be bright green, or green, and then we say to you, sir, are going to be yellow, you're going to maintain yellow. So it's writing the code that is most broad first. So whenever you are editing this, just bear in mind, what you do here will only affect your children if your children do not have more specific instructions, right? So let's try the image now. Let's say this image actually shouldn't be an image. This should be a linear gradient, okay? Now, all of them are listening to that instruction, except for the one that has a specific instruction to be an image with this very strange bunny thing in it, right? The rest of them are listening. And that goes for text as well. And this is critical. So when you are doing anything related to text, about the worst thing that you can do for yourself is something like I've done here on the right-hand side, where you've gone and edited the style of the text within this. Because let's say we think, well, prices typically are on the right, actually. That's how we should do them. Okay. And maybe what we should do is we should use Roboto Mono. And then let's do bold. Okay, fantastic. Except this one is not listening to any of that. It has its own ideas. So we say, okay, well, we're going to select this particular object here, and we're going to right click and say reset all overrides. Now, unfortunately, what that's going to do is that is going to remove the actual text that you had in there. And that's kind of a problem, right? Because if you've written a whole paragraph, you're going to lose that paragraph unless of course you go into version history, copy it into a notes app, and then paste it in. That's a mission, especially if you have to do that multiple times. So now what if we try and copy the properties? So if we go here and we right click on one of these objects and we say copy properties, we go in here and we say copy paste properties. Okay, that looks good. Now if we decide, actually, you know what, Roboto Mono, not working for us. Let's go for PT Sans. Fantastic. Oh, but look at that. The specific instruction of you must be Roboto Mono has still been given to that object. So the only way that you can fix this is to say reset all overrides. And then you're going to lose that text there. Critically important, especially if you are doing this on real projects where you've got hundreds and hundreds of text fields or something like that. That is such a big mistake that I personally have made many times until I learned never to do that. And I've seen my colleagues and friends make that mistake a lot too. So really critical, never ever edit the styling of text within your children objects, your sort of base objects that are actually on the final page. Always edit your text styling on some kind of main component or some main component of a main component. Plugins. The Figma community is honestly amazing. There are so many great plugins that you can use to do pretty much anything, right? So one of the ones that I use often, which I've already shown you, is Contrast. So Contrast, and there's quite a few of them, and if I spell it properly, maybe it'll come up. Contrast is a great tool, and if I was looking in plugins, we could even see it. You can see I have it installed, and I can actually just show you what it looks like, and I've actually already done that. But Plugins, contrast. This is a great tool for if you want to basically see the difference in contrast. You want this number to be under, you want this number to be over 4.5 in order to get a AA rating, and you want to be over 7 to get a AAA rating. What this means is, if you are under a AAA rating, it means that depending on the country that you work in, you may come into some legal issues regarding accessibility. There are certain countries that have accessibility rules around what your website needs to be able to cater for in terms of its accessibility. So if you try and do terms and conditions, but your terms and conditions text is not legally legible, you effectively have no terms and conditions on your website. So make sure, and of course, not legal advice, do your own research, but always make sure that really important things like terms and conditions are at the very least passing one of these. But have a look at your country and your company policy and your industry guidelines as to, do we need to be AA or AAA on those? Really critical to do. So that's a great tool. Contrast also allows you to sort of scan the entire page, which is a bit messy because it sort of picks up every single object and whether that is passing. I'm doing okay, except for the thing, which we talked about. So that's good. Another plugin that I use quite a lot is Figma. Now this is really important, especially when you're doing a rebranding. So if you're doing a rebranding and let's say you're going from one font to the other, you want to make sure, for example, let's say the old font that the company was using was this PT Sans Bold, and the new font is Montserrat, and you've got to make sure that all of your designs come out in Montserrat. This tells you exactly where all of those objects are, right? So I can see, okay, here's price. So all of the price things are in PT Sans. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back here, change this to Montserrat, and then we are going to reload Figma. Fantastic. Everything's now in Montserrat. So bear in mind that all of the plugins are effectively sort of writing to the page, reading the page. They don't have as much ability to write to the page. In other words, Figma can't really detect things automatically without you actioning something. So a lot of the time with many of these plugins, you have to sort of close it and come back, or refresh, or press a button, or do something to sort of action it, right? Let me show you another one where there's a great example of that. So another plugin, let me go and get it quickly because I don't have it on this computer, is Redlines. No, it's called Figma Measure. Cool. I mean, that's probably good because Redlines was not a great name. Don't really know what that actually means. Okay, so let's say your devs are being a little bit difficult. They don't really want to go into the inspect panel over here and actually do their research in terms of how Figma works. They're not comfortable with it. Maybe you want to give them a little extra help, right? Maybe you want to give them specific instructions as to how big all of these objects are. So what you could do is you could install this plugin called Figma Measure, which I think used to be called Redlines. Oh no, it's a different one. It is a different one. I think Redlines, or unless this is the same one, but they've like drastically updated it. Anyway, we'll do the same thing. So you select an object, you click on this, and then look at that. Now you've got a label, and that label is going to tell you all sorts of things. Now, what this is effectively doing, right, is, and I think it's locking it as well, which is a little bit frustrating. Yeah. What this is effectively doing is it is creating static objects, right? These are not objects that this somehow controls. These are just baseline normal objects. circles and rectangles and pieces of text and everything like that. So let's try this with this entire object. Maybe that'll give us a more reasonable example. There we go, 217 pixels. And there we go. And of course, you'll have lots of different options as to how you would like to style it, what the numbers are they outside, etc. So what does outside look like? And as you can see, as I move, the measurements move with it. So best not to actually unlock this, because it's just going to move as it wants. And then we can see we're gonna unselect that. We're gonna put that on that side. That makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? Fantabulous. Now that's a nice piece of documentation. And I can unselect that. Maybe I can put that here. That's quite nice. Cool. So, quite a few of these sort of measurement tools, but really useful, especially if your developers are not as comfortable using Figma. And it is also quite a nice way to just double check your measurements. Why is it that this is 150? Why is it that this is 118? Try and just, make sure that you have a reasonable answer for why the measurements are the way that they are in your designs. So, there are plenty of plugins, so many plugins. The other piece of community that I just want to touch on is the files. So files are basically much like GitHub. They're sort of things that you can, they're files that you can sort of fork, right? So you can sort of copy these files. You can see that I've got one open here called Pegasus Design System, which I've copied, which looks absolutely beautiful. It's just so nice. It's got this lovely icon set, which is very modern and squishy and beautiful. And I'm just so in love with this icon set. It's so lovely. Then you've got, your color palettes, and I can see that they've done some effect styles, which is very nice. Some grid styles. They've got some plugins in here. They've got a bunch of text styles and a bunch of colors. So here's your primary, here's your grayscale, here is your gradients, your errors and warnings, etc. So that's lovely. Really great job. This looks amazing. So if you're starting a new project, I think the next project I start, definitely going to be using Pegasus. Seems like a really fast way to really get the ball rolling on your project. And they even give you a lovely little set of components, which is quite nice. Although I am a big fan of dark mode, but maybe I can find a dark mode version, and I'm sure there are many. I'm sure that if I type in dark mode, I will get just an absolute glut of resources. There are so many people who build out these things. Yeah, so highly recommend you have a look at this, learn from some folks who may have been doing this for a bit longer than you or I have. Lastly, keeping your files clean. Now, we've already talked about one thing that you can do to keep your files clean, and that is use Fontphasia to double check that you don't have any strange fonts. For instance, what is this Inter? Well, that's being used by the other plugins, so maybe that's kind of acceptable. But if you've got a long, I was working on a project recently where at the end of it, we were kind of saying, okay, let's clean up the file. And we effectively had, 10 or 20 different fonts that we couldn't answer for. We needed to go back and clean up that file because a whole bunch of different people worked on it and lots of reasons that could happen. But at the end of the day, if that is in your file, the developers are going to ask questions, so you should clean it up. One way you can do that is with Fontasia. The other one to bear in mind is your color styles. So if you select all, so if you go Command A and you select all, you're going to see the selection colors, right? Now, ideally, what you would want from this, and thankfully this is here to make my point, but there's a bunch of colors here that I did not. And so what I could do, if I wanted to be really difficult, is I could say, well, this yellow FOF28B is this yellow, but as you can see here, that's FOF28B as well. But I want it to actually be yellow. I don't want to have it in this list. And you kind of have to, go through this list and ensure that all of these colors are actually named colors. So you go in, you select this and you say, okay, well, that's actually just gray. This 30% opacity black maybe should have a name, so we can just add a name. So we'll say black at 30% or something like that. And through this process, basically just, whittle down the amounts of colors that you have until you have a clean document. All right, so that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you do have any questions on Figma, on UX design, on UI design, please let me know and I'll be happy to make a video. Thank you.